The Kurukshetra War is one of the most complex, debated, and influential conflicts in human history. Known primarily through the Indian epic Mahabharata, this war has long been viewed as a mythological struggle between divine heroes and villains. Yet when examined carefully through archaeology, textual criticism, geography, and comparative history, the Kurukshetra War begins to appear not merely as a religious epic, but as a memory of a real political and social conflict from the late Bronze Age or early Iron Age Indian subcontinent. Rather than asking whether the Kurukshetra War happened exactly as described, historians ask a more meaningful question: what kind of historical reality lies beneath the epic narrative? The Mahabharata itself is not a single text written by one author. It is a layered composition that evolved over centuries. The earliest core likely emerged between 1500 and 1000 BCE, with later expansions continuing until around 400 CE. This means the story preserved older memories while adapting them to new social, religious, and political realities. At its core, the Kurukshetra War describes a dynastic struggle between two branches of the Kuru royal family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. This alone places the story firmly within a recognizable historical pattern. Across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to China, succession disputes among royal families frequently led to devastating wars. The geographical setting of the war is strikingly precise. Kurukshetra is not a mythical realm. It is a real region in modern-day Haryana, India. Ancient Vedic texts repeatedly refer to Kurukshetra as a sacred land and political heartland. Archaeological surveys in this region have uncovered painted gray ware culture sites dated roughly between 1200 and 600 BCE. This culture aligns closely with the period many scholars associate with the earliest layers of the Mahabharata tradition. Painted gray ware settlements indicate small kingdoms, fortified towns, iron weapons, chariots, and an agrarian economy, all elements central to the Mahabharata's description of society. This strongly suggests that the war narrative reflects real social conditions rather than pure fantasy. The political system described in the epic is also historically plausible. Kings ruled over janapadas or territorial states, supported by warrior elites known as kshatriyas. Loyalty to family lineage and personal honor defined political legitimacy. There were no standing national armies. Instead, coalitions formed through kinship, marriage alliances, and mutual interest. This is exactly how early Indo-Aryan polities operated. The conflict itself begins not with divine prophecy, but with a dispute over succession and land. The Pandavas and Kauravas are cousins, descendants of King Bharata of the Kuru dynasty. When King Pandu dies prematurely, his sons, the Pandavas, are still young. Their uncle Dhritarashtra, blind from birth, rules as regent, while his own sons, the Kauravas, grow to adulthood at court. This arrangement creates a classic political crisis. The Pandavas possess legitimate claim through lineage, but the Kauravas control power through proximity to the throne. Such situations often lead to conflict in early monarchies, where laws of succession were customary rather than codified. The Mahabharata repeatedly emphasizes attempts at compromise. Land was divided. Agreements were made. Councils were held. This suggests that war was not inevitable but emerged from escalating mistrust, ambition, and fear. From a historical standpoint, this is critical. Real wars are rarely sudden. They grow from prolonged political failure. The famous dice game, often interpreted symbolically, can also be read historically. Gambling with land, wealth, and political rights was not unheard of in ancient societies. Treaties and oaths were binding, and violating them had serious consequences. The Pandavas' loss and subsequent exile may reflect a real political displacement, where a rival faction was temporarily removed from power. Exile itself was a common solution in ancient political systems, allowing rivals to survive without immediate bloodshed. However, exile almost always planted the seeds of future war. When the Pandavas return after 13 years, the political landscape has hardened. Alliances have formed. Military preparations are underway. Both sides actively recruit allies from across the subcontinent. This reflects a world of interconnected kingdoms rather than isolated tribes. The lists of participating kingdoms in the Mahabharata are extensive and geographically diverse. While some names may be exaggerated or symbolic, many correspond to real ancient regions: Gandhara, Cambodia, Avanti, Magadha, Panchala, Matsya, and others. This suggests the war narrative preserved memory of a large-scale conflict involving multiple regional powers. Such coalition warfare was common in the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age. Comparable examples exist in the Trojan war tradition, where Homer lists numerous Greek kings and allies. The weapons described in the Kurukshetra War are also telling. While divine astras dominate later retellings, the core descriptions focus on bows, spears, swords, maces, chariots, elephants, and infantry. These align with archaeological evidence from early historic India. Iron weapons, in particular, appear frequently. The widespread use of iron technology around 1200 BCE transformed warfare across South Asia. Iron-tipped arrows and stronger swords made combat deadlier and more decisive, increasing the scale and intensity of conflict. Chariots occupy a central role in the epic. Far from being mythological vehicles, chariots were elite military platforms across the ancient world. From Egypt to Mesopotamia to China, chariots defined aristocratic warfare. Their prominence in the Mahabharata reflects a real military system dominated by warrior elites. Elephants, another key feature, were uniquely Indian. Archaeological and textual evidence confirms their use in warfare by at least the first millennium BCE. Elephants provided shock power, psychological terror, and mobile platforms for archers. The Kurukshetra War is said to have lasted 18 days. While this may seem brief, it is historically plausible for a decisive battle between coalition armies. Ancient wars often consisted of prolonged standoffs followed by short periods of intense fighting. The epic's day-by-day structure may represent a stylized memory of shifting tactical phases rather than literal daily combat. One of the most striking features of the war narrative is its emphasis on rules of warfare. Combat was governed by dharma, a concept encompassing law, duty, and moral order. Warriors were expected to fight equals, avoid attacking the unarmed, and respect time-bound rules. This reflects a real warrior ethic common in early aristocratic societies. Similar codes existed among Greek hoplites and medieval knights. Such codes often broke down under pressure, and the Mahabharata repeatedly highlights moments when rules were violated. These violations are not glorified. They are portrayed as tragic necessities or moral failures, suggesting a reflective tradition grappling with the ethics of violence. This moral ambiguity is one of the strongest indicators that the Kurukshetra war tradition is rooted in historical trauma. Societies tend to mythologize victories but moralize catastrophes. The death toll described in the epic is enormous, sometimes exaggerated to cosmic proportions. While these numbers cannot be taken literally, archaeology confirms widespread disruption in the painted gray ware period. Many settlements were abandoned or reorganized, suggesting social upheaval. The aftermath of the war is portrayed not as triumph, but as desolation. The victors inherit a broken world. Entire lineages are destroyed. Women are widowed. Elders mourn the loss of the future. This post-war despair contrasts sharply with typical heroic epics and again points toward a cultural memory of collapse rather than celebration. From a comparative perspective, the Kurukshetra War resembles other foundational war myths. The Trojan War, the Battle of the Ten Kings in the Rig Veda, and early Chinese dynastic conflicts all function as origin stories, explaining political reorganization after chaos. The Kurukshetra War appears to mark a transition period in Indian history, from tribal chiefdoms to more centralized kingdoms, from oral tradition to codified law, from ritual-based authority to political sovereignty. The inclusion of the Bhagavad Gita within the war narrative further complicates historical analysis. While the philosophical dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna likely represents a later theological layer, it also reflects real ethical debates arising from warfare in a changing society. Philosophy often emerges in response to crisis. The Gita's focus on duty, detachment, and moral responsibility suggests a society struggling to reconcile violence with spiritual ideals. Historically, this aligns with the emergence of new religious movements in India during the first millennium BCE, including early Buddhism and Jainism, both of which rejected Vedic ritualism and questioned the morality of war. The Kurukshetra war tradition thus became a vessel for centuries of reflection, absorbing new ideas while preserving old memories. Modern historians do not claim that Krishna was a divine charioteer or that celestial weapons destroyed armies. Instead, they view these elements as symbolic expressions of power, fear, and the incomprehensibility of mass violence. Underneath the symbolism lies a plausible historical conflict, a dynastic war among early Indo-Aryan kingdoms in northern India fought with real weapons, real armies, and real consequences. The absence of direct contemporary inscriptions does not invalidate this conclusion. Many ancient wars are known only through later literary traditions. What matters is internal consistency, archaeological correlation, and comparative plausibility. By these standards, the Kurukshetra War stands as one of the strongest candidates for a mythologized historical event. It was not a single moment, but a process. Not a divine spectacle, but a human tragedy. Not the triumph of good over evil, but the collapse of an old order. And that is precisely why it endured. Because societies remember catastrophes longer than victories, the War of Kurukshetra was not merely a clash between two families. It was a reflection of the political, social, and moral structure of ancient India. By the time the armies assembled on the plains of Kurukshetra, diplomacy had already failed. Krishna's final peace mission to Hastinapura had been rejected. Duryodhana's refusal to give even 5 villages made war inevitable. The battlefield of Kurukshetra was carefully chosen. Located in present-day Haryana, it was a sacred land long associated with rituals, sacrifices, and royal gatherings. Fighting on such holy ground added a moral weight to the conflict. This was not supposed to be a war of conquest, but a war to restore order and justice, or what ancient texts called dharma. Both sides prepared massive armies. Ancient estimates speak of 18, Akshawini's 11 on the Kaurava side and 7 with the Pandavas. While these numbers are symbolic and likely exaggerated, archaeology and comparative studies suggest that this was one of the largest military mobilizations in early South Asian history. Infantry formed the backbone of both armies, supported by chariots, cavalry, and war elephants. Weapons included bows, spears, swords, maces, and early forms of metal armor. Leadership defined the early phase of the war. Bhishma, the grand patriarch of the Kuru dynasty, commanded the Kaurava forces. His presence alone symbolized legitimacy and tradition. Bhishma was bound by a vow to fight for the throne of Hastinapura, even though he personally believed the Pandavas had the stronger moral claim. This contradiction embodied the central tragedy of the war: loyalty versus righteousness. The opening days of battle were brutal and chaotic. Chariot warfare dominated, with elite warriors engaging in single combat while massive infantry clashes raged around them. Bhishma proved nearly unstoppable. Ancient accounts describe him as an anchor of the Kaurava army, breaking Pandava formations repeatedly. His skill and experience created a psychological advantage that the Pandavas struggled to overcome. Yet the war was not governed solely by rules of honor. While ancient texts describe codes of conduct such as not attacking the unarmed or wounded, these rules gradually eroded as losses mounted. Survival and victory began to outweigh ideals. The turning point came with the fall of Bhishma. Unable to defeat him directly, the Pandavas resorted to strategy. Shikhandi, whose past identity and vow made Bhishma refuse to fight him, was placed in front of Arjuna. Using Shikhandi as cover, Arjuna struck Bhishma down. Mortally wounded, Bhishma chose to remain alive on a bed of arrows, waiting for an auspicious moment to die. Bhishma's fall marked the end of restraint. With him gone, the war entered a far darker phase. Drona, the royal teacher of both Pandavas and Kauravas, assumed command of the Kaurava army. His personal conflict was even more severe than Bhishma's. Drona loved Arjuna like a son but was bound by duty and debt to fight for Duryodhana. Under his leadership, warfare became more tactical and ruthless. The most devastating event of this phase was the death of Abhimanyu, Arjuna's young son. Trapped inside a complex military formation known as the Chakravyuha, Abhimanyu fought with extraordinary courage but was ultimately killed by multiple warriors attacking him simultaneously. His death was a violation of the accepted rules of war and became one of the most emotionally charged moments of the conflict. Abhimanyu's killing shattered any remaining illusions about honor. From this point onward, vengeance drove many actions. Arjuna vowed to kill Jayadratha, who had played a role in Abhimanyu's death, before sunset the next day or take his own life. Through deception, distraction, and precise timing, Arjuna fulfilled his vow, further escalating the cycle of revenge. Drona himself fell through deception. Believing his son, Ashwathama, had been killed, a half-truth carefully engineered by the Pandavas, Drona laid down his weapons. He was then killed by Drishtadyumna. This act haunted the victors, reinforcing the theme that moral compromise was the price of survival. With Drona gone, Karna took command of the Kaurava forces. Karna remains one of the most complex figures of the Kurukshetra War. Born to Kunti before her marriage, but abandoned at birth, Karna was raised by a charioteer's family. Despite his royal blood, he faced lifelong humiliation due to his perceived low status. Karna's loyalty to Duryodhana was absolute. Duryodhana gave him respect and power when others mocked him, and Karna repaid that loyalty without hesitation. On the battlefield, Karna proved to be Arjuna's equal in skill and ferocity. The final duel between Karna and Arjuna was not just a battle between warriors, it was the collision of fate, identity, and unresolved injustice. When Karna's chariot wheel became stuck in the ground, he asked for a pause, invoking the old rules of war. Krishna urged Arjuna to strike, reminding him of the many rules Karna had broken earlier. Arjuna killed Karna, sealing the fate of the Kaurava army. The war's last commander was Shalya, whose leadership could not reverse the inevitable. The final day saw a brutal mace duel between Bhima and Duryodhana. Though trained under the same teachers, Their styles differed. Bhima, driven by hatred and memory of past humiliations, struck Duryodhana below the waist in a legal blow according to the rules of combat. Duryodhana fell, mortally wounded. The war should have ended there, but it did not. That night, Ashwathama launched a surprise attack on the Pandava camp. In a massacre that targeted sleeping warriors, he killed the remaining sons of the Pandavas and many others. This act erased any remaining moral distinction between victor and defeated. When dawn came, the battlefield was silent. The Kurukshetra War had lasted 18 days. Millions were dead, according to traditional accounts. Entire lineages were wiped out. The Kuru dynasty, for which the war was fought, was effectively destroyed. The Pandavas emerged victorious, but victory brought little joy. Yudhishthira, crowned king, was overwhelmed by guilt. He questioned the value of a kingdom built on bloodshed. The war had restored political order, but at an unbearable moral cost. From a historical perspective, the Kurukshetra War likely reflects a real period of large-scale conflict during the late Vedic era around the 2nd millennium BCE. Archaeological evidence does not confirm the epic scale, but it does suggest increasing militarization, territorial consolidation, and dynastic warfare in northern India during this time. The Mahabharata itself evolved over centuries, absorbing philosophical debates, regional traditions, and moral inquiries. It is not a simple war chronicle. It is a meditation on power, duty, fate, and human weakness. The Kurukshetra War teaches that history is not shaped only by heroes and villains, but by choices made under pressure. It shows how moral certainty collapses in times of crisis, and how even righteous causes can lead to catastrophic outcomes. In the end, Kurukshetra was not about who won the war. It was about what was lost. A civilization questioning itself. A society confronting the limits of violence. And a reminder, echoing across millennia, that war never truly ends when the fighting stops.